Welcome, students, to Monk Meditation, the show about monks in the world of Warcraft.
Tonight we brew some beer, tap some kegs, kick back, relax, and talk about Brewmasters and tanking in Hellfire and beyond. Coming up on Monk Meditation, episode 54.
Here's your host, Chai T.
Hello everybody, tonight is a special episode as we talk all about Brewmasters with some familiar faces and some new ones as well. Without further ado, because some of them have to raid pretty soon, let's check in with tonight's host and how WoW is now in
Storm, Earth,
and fire!
I'm going to start off tonight with one of our returning hosts, our first Brewmaster, Sunnier, author of Sunnier'sArtOfWar.com. How you doing?
Good. It's nice to be back, as always.
Yeah, it's good. Great to have you. I look forward to talking tanking with you. All right, and first-time guest from Working as Intended on Airy Peak US, a tank that tries to keep air alive and fails most of the time. Mazer, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
All right, and last but not least, we have two expert Death Knights, and they dabble in brewmastering a little bit. I'm going to start off with Magdalena, author of the Death Knight section, the official strategy guide for Warlords of Draenor from Whisperwind US and the Something Wicked Guild. How you doing?
Doing great. It's good to be on.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. Troxism as well from the Encore Guild on Illidan US, one of the top-ranked Death Knights in the world. How you doing, sir?
About as fine as usual.
All right. Well, I appreciate everybody for joining us here. This is going to be a good discussion. Well, it's time to get caught up in the crazy whirlwind of WoW news in
Dizzying Haze.
Okay, we got a somewhat official 6.2.2 launch, so we know when we're going to be flying, so get that Zen Cloud glyph reglyphed. We're finally not going to fall to our deaths. September 1st is the official quote-unquote release date. There was some clarification indicating it could be delayed, but that's what they're shooting for, so we're going to hope for that. Everyone feel good about September 1st?
Weeks, not months, they said. It's about time. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's like, I personally don't care about flying, but I think it's ridiculous it's delayed that much. Like, if I cared, I'd be pretty mad.
Right.
that
Yeah,
was
I think it
delayed
was
this
the
much.
PvP mode that they're mercenary mode is what they're calling it, I think. That's what delayed it a lot, just trying to get that tested and going, I believe. But hey, that's good. And we got a drop of patch notes as well. So Windwalkers, Mistweavers, and Brewmasters, specifically Windwalkers though, time to rejoice. Blackout Kick, Rising Sun Kick, get a 10% buff each. Tiger Palm and the already ridiculously powerful Fist of Fury gets a 20% buff. Yay!
It's about time.
Right.
I mean, those are changes aimed at the average Windwalker player, and the high-end Windwalker is already fine, so these are just over buffs on that regard.
So I found it interesting that Holinka, he was reaching out to the community to see which class and which spec he should play for the PvP thing in the PTR, and they voted Windwalker Monk, and all of a sudden they get buffs. Probably not related at all, but I like to think they are.
Well, he was in strong contention to play a Death Knight as well, but it seems that monks outstripped us by, I think, actually a pretty respectable margin towards the end.
Yeah, with the hype train got on board with Windwalker, and we pushed it pretty hard. So this, if you're interested in what this is going to do to our numbers, it actually is a very significant buff, several thousand DPS higher. You can check out at cheeburst.com. Hina Lover put up some theory crafting on what this is going to mean for Windwalkers. So you can check that out on the forums. He's also posted on MMOC if you like to troll there, and I don't know why you do, because MMOC. All right, for Brewmasters, this is already going to be a ridiculously powerful buff for a ridiculously powerful DPS class that's supposed to be a tank. So have fun with that. Mistweavers, it's going to help on Crane Stance, so there's that. One thing to note is this does not affect Chi Explosion in any way. So even though Blackout Kick is getting buffed, this does not affect the modifier for Chi Explosion. So Chi Explosion did not get the buff there. So if I recall correctly from Hino Lover, and he'll have to correct me, and you check out the forum post, but this is actually going to bump up the multi-strike value significantly for Chi Explosion when you do that build. So haste is still number one, but multi-strike gets way up there in terms of rating. So use that multi-strike gear from your Serenity, and you'll be good to go. All right. Any last-minute thoughts on 6.2.2?
I'm
Mostly
looking forward
that
to being able to fall from places and not
Yes.
die.
Oh my
So
god.
that'll be amazing.
Oh, so looking forward to
I mean,
that.
I already mentioned before, it's kind of interesting, like how they balance around different skill levels. Like the Windwalker changes are completely unnecessary on the high end.
They still haven't
you have-
done what they needed to do with Windwalkers, and they need to. We've been calling for this forever. Instead of buffing or single target, which they do need to do, but they need to nerf Storm, Earth, and Fire. So we're not ridiculously
Well, I
overpowered with everything
mean,
else.
it's one of those things where with every spec, I could probably give you 2 or 3 things that quote need to happen, but they never will.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. All right, Mazer, you got something?
With these buffs, it's important to remember that most people aren't at the high end. Most people are average, as it turns out. And so a buff that helps the average player a lot for a class that's actually very skill dependent and kind of weak at these middle level. It's important to have buffs like this in order to make them competitive, so people actually play them, so they get to the higher level.
Right.
So
yeah.
I'm all in favor of stuff that helps the average Windwalker. Because
Absolutely.
I've tried it. It's a miserable class to play.
Oh, hey now. Be nice.
I think it's also fair to say that being the only DPS spec for its class means that Windwalker also doesn't have a lot of choice. You can't respec from Windwalker to the DPS spec, and it's melee. And as much as I mean, to be fair, even though Hellfire Citadel is, I would say, one of the most melee-friendly instances to date, you still have
Doesn't
an
matter, melee suck balls. Bring like
I mean,
4.
I mean, you also have the issue where several range specs, warlocks and mages, are quite overpowered as well. So I think that melee specs getting all the help that they are able to use is a good thing, especially when that melee spec is the only option that you really have.
Absolutely.
I mean, I have something to add to that, but I think it'll work better in one of the later parts.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
just
we'll get to
say
that a little bit. Yeah, you take a good player and you put them in any class, they're going to shine. So, like Mazer said, a lot of us are at the average to above average level, but not at the top, and so any buffs we get, quite helpful. So, all right, well, it's now time to meditate and expand our knowledge in
Transcendence.
All right, this is the meat of this episode. We're going to talk all Brewmasters, all tanking, all the time. And since I don't tank or Brewmaster, I'm just going to let you guys all handle it here. So, the first topic, LeBlue helped me out with this, so I'm not just spouting random crap here, by the way. So, pushing damage and living on the edge of survival. Is this really a compelling tank mechanic? And we have a follow-up question to that as well. Does tank damage getting toned down lessen this at all for you as a tank? So do you enjoy just living on that edge the whole time, or do you enjoy having much more interesting mechanics instead of this whole spike thing going on? Sunnier, what do you think?
Well, I think it's kind of a jump to say that a trade-off between damage and survival is automatically going to mean you're living on the edge. Like, you can live on the edge, but that's not where the really interesting part of that trade-off really comes from. It comes from watching your defenses and then reacting to them. And I have, on my podcast, Tankcast, we've talked about this quite a bit, so
Right.
forgive me if I'm like repeating myself from what I've said over there. But it's more of having good offensive and defensive trade-offs can makes you think more about those defenses, because it suddenly becomes really important when you use them instead of just all the time. You have to kind of play into, have I had a really good string of luck? Can I use my offenses now? Have I had a really bad string of luck? Do I have to play really defensively now? And it builds a much more well-rounded and exciting play style for everybody.
Okay. All right. Mazer, what do you think?
I think it depends on the group you have. If you are pushing damage to the point where you actually are on the edge, that's no good, because our job isn't necessarily to put out the damage. Even if we go crazy, we're probably not going to be that high. Whereas if you can reduce your damage intake and maybe not take as many healers, then there's going to be a bigger gain to the raid that way. I tend to play a more survival-based playstyle, and we tend to run healer light, so I think that works for me. At least for monks, the choice comes down to Chi Explosion versus Serenity, and that's more than just a DPS boost going with Chi Explosion. It's a whole change in the playstyle too, and that can be kind of an interesting playstyle trade-off depending on how you like to do it and manage your Chi.
Okay. And Troxism?
I mean, I've written 10,000 words on the topic, and I could write another 10,000. To summarize, basically, I agree with most of what Sunnier said, but to expound on that, like, tanking is in an awkward spot compared to, say, DPS, because you're competing against an absolute scale. You're either up to par and you stay alive, or you aren't and you die, and it's almost binary in a way. I mean, there's obviously some middle ground to be, like, unstable, but it's like, if you pass the bar, getting more survivability rarely has any impact. Now you might say, oh, well, it'll make it easier for healers to heal you. That sounds great in theory until you actually look at logs and realize half the healing a tank gets is overhealing, even on progression. And, like, past that, what that means is, and past that, like, we were talking before about average versus high skill players. Well, you can't balance for the very, very highest skill players in terms of survivability. If the tip-top players can barely stay alive, then everyone else literally can't even do the content, which isn't fun for them. So what that means is, and what Blizzard ends up doing, is they balance survivability around the average. And even Mythic, it's the Mythic average, which is much different than the Mythic top end. And what that means is this survival to DPS trade-off needs to exist, else players who are above average end up literally being bored to tears. Like, it's just like, if you have no way to trade off survival from DPS, and if your DPS is completely meaningless, then once you pass the minimum bar for survival, what's the point of even playing better? You may as well, like, you're just rewarded for mediocrity at that point. Like, if there's no drive to improve, if there's no way you can help your raid by getting better, then what's even the point? That's a poorly designed game. So to me, having the survival to DPS trade-off lets Blizzard cater to all skill levels. It lets the average player still be able to do the content. Maybe they'll do less damage, but their raid isn't just going to automatically wipe over and over. And it lets the more skilled player both be challenged in terms of survival. Like Sunnier said, having less mitigation to work with makes you actually be forced to use it better. So it makes it more fun for the more skilled player, because he actually has to give a shit about his survival when he has less of it. And it makes him contribute more to his raid, meaning he feels rewarded, he or she feels rewarded for their skill. That is a good thing. That's basically perfect design.
Okay.
And if you change it to where tanks have no trade-offs, then every good tank player will just quit to switch something else.
So Magdalena, what do you think?
Role.
I think that I want to put an emphasis on meaningful trade-off for damage to survival. I don't want to trade, say, a good chunk of my survival for only a 5% or a 10% gain. In order for, I think, for multiple players to see this as being worthwhile, the amount of damage that you gain when you go from, both gearing and playing defensively to offensively needs to be a significant gain. And I think that this ties into your question about, tank damage overall. Because I often see a lot of concerns about, well, so-and-so tank is doing more damage than so-and-so. But then you compare those numbers to what actual DPS are doing. Now, to be clear, I'm not advocating that we return to a MOP era style where tanks, were capable of topping the charts with vengeance. I do believe that in an average, a patchwork type scenario, tanks should be reasonably below DPS, but reasonably below and what we are at right now, there, is not the same thing. I believe that towards the ends of the Warlords of Draenor beta, Blizzard, I think it was a Blizzard dev, Celestin, I think, he was quoted as saying that the intention was for a mitigatively geared tank to deal approximately 75% of the damage of a DPS.
It's not
And
even
for
close to reality.
Yeah, exactly. And then offensively, that should rise to between 85 to 90%. But as we can see right now, that's not even close to what it really is. So, I mean, I absolutely agree with what's been said already about why these trade-offs need to exist. And I also, I just want to emphasize that there should be significant trade-offs. If I am living on the edge, if I am sacrificing a lot of my survivability, then I need to obviously feel that in terms of punishment. But I also need to feel as though the damage gain is significant and worthwhile.
Okay, thank you
I
very
also
much.
have something to add, by the way.
Go ahead.
To say something else about the whole trade-off, by the way, a lot of people mistake like a damage survival to DPS trade-off as in like, oh, you should just drop all your survival. Like a good example would be like if, say, you had your offensive, you had a mitigative and an offensive spell use the same resources, and then, like let's say if Death Strike and Breath of Sindragosa used the exact same resource. That meant while Breath was active, you could not Death Strike at all. That would basically just turn you into a plate DPS that
Right.
can't be crit. That's not a trade-off, that's just fucking healers carry me for the duration of this because I can't even play like as a tank. That's not playing a tank, that's just playing a DPS that gets hit.
Right.
Like there still needs to be, even when you're sacrificing survival, you still need to be able to play as a tank to some extent.
Yeah,
You need
that's
to
why.
actually both tank and DPS gameplay.
Yeah,
there.
Brewmasters have a much more interesting choice with Chi Explosion versus Serenity because both of them have survivability. Chi Explosion just has a little less but more DPS.
Well, Ref right now is awkward compared to 6.2, but it works.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, that buff with that buff to Blackout Kick is going to make Serenity a little bit more juicy. So one thing I do want to touch on as well is the damage, outgoing damage. Does spiking damage harder, is that more engaging for you, or is having other mechanics like add, pickup, and things like that, which is more engaging, to have that rush of adrenaline where you're getting smacked really hard and you have to bust your cooldowns to the right time, or would you prefer much more of a active playstyle where you're picking up ads or doing some sort of dance mechanic like in Spirit Kings or something like that? What's more engaging to you?
All of the above, A and B.
Variety
If you're
is
gonna
the
pick
spice of
one,
life,
Pretty
so-
much,
if you're
yeah.
gonna pick one, spike damage. You know why? Non-spike damage has almost no gameplay around it. Let's say a boss just does 200k DPS to me consistently and that never changes for the entire fight. What gameplay is there around that? I mean, yes, you wouldn't want to like use healing abilities when you're topped off by healers, but that's about it. Like you just maximizing your HPS / overall mitigation as a tank against consistent damage is very easy. You just do your rotation and don't do very stupid stuff like just healing when you're full health. That's all very easy. Reacting to spike damage, especially random spike damage, not a mechanic that's like every 30 seconds on the dot.
Right.
Like those people you just like, oh, well, I need to use a cooldown here or I'll die. Wow, that's hard. Like reacting to random spike damage forces you to think about, okay, during this period of damage, do I need to use a cooldown? How many cooldowns do I have available? How many externals do I have available, etc.? How can I plan things out so that I minimize my chance of death? Like that's like tank gameplay, like the only hard tank gameplay is surviving random burst. Any other type of survival gameplay just turns into a fucking HPS numbers race with you and the healers.
Right.
And it's just like, well, I guess you can stack whatever your best HPS stat is for every tank class, but that's not very engaging. It's not hard.
Okay. Any other opinions out there?
I thought Spirit Kings was a really interesting fight with the dance mechanic, and I like that kind of dance mechanic. Even though it was something that everyone did on Hans and Franz, I thought moving around and dodging scampers, especially on Mythic, was a lot of fun. So I'd like to see more stuff like that. In particular, in HFC, the tank gameplay isn't particularly interesting, and I think part of that
And
is
there
there's
and
no.
do nothing.
Yeah, I mean, you just kind of stand there. You're probably not going to die. You have some things that you have to pop cooldowns for. And granted, I've only done heroic at this point, but it's not threatening. So the gameplay for us has been we drop a healer, or we try to push the damage. We try to have a little bit of fun with it, but there's no tank mechanic that's interesting. Even the one thing they tried on Zakun, where you go into the realm where you have to jump over stuff, that's very boring, especially for monks, because you can just pop Zen meditation and stand in it. So
I mean, it's not much better for other tanks.
Yeah, I'd like to see more stuff like that, but I'd like to see it actually be tricky or fun.
And then
I think
there's
picking
the
up
infuriating Cormrock. Those mechanics
Or
are
the
super
even
fun.
better, Suicide on Archimon, because it's just the best strategy.
Right, yes.
But I'll talk about that later. I have
Okay.
so much to say about shit like that.
All right. Well, right now, most tanking classes have their own niche. They have their own strengths and weaknesses and end up shifting as gear levels go up. We saw the majority of top 100 guilds bring Brewmasters in Tier 17, some even 2 Brewmasters. Is this flavor of the month good for the tanking community as a whole, or would it be better to homogenize the tanks a little bit so they're a little bit more consistent?
I think that we need to ask what we mean by homogenize. Are we saying that every single tank needs to have the same cooldowns? Has the same toolkit? Because no, that's not absolutely something that I think is necessary. I know that one of the discussions I've had, and I'm speaking just for a moment as a DK over here, one of the discussions that I've had in my community is about the topic of mobility. I think that absolutely nobody could deny that mobility is very important in terms of what it brings to a class, and that simply dismissing it as flavor, as in, oh, one class has it, one class doesn't, is a little foolhardy, because it brings real benefits to the raid, especially as a tank. But with that being said, I also don't believe that all mobility needs to be equal. And in fact, it's not to go too far into the future right now, but demon hunters are being advertised as being a class that brings, quote, unparalleled mobility. I see it as more of a problem when you turn something like that into an arms race, and this is going back to the whole question of homogenization. If you start to make every tank spec more similar to one another, then there's always going to be a ranking totem pole where one tank spec is ranked way over something else because its cooldowns are better for whatever reason. And I think that's something that can be avoided. I mean, if we're talking about baseline survival skills, then sure, I mean, those have to be relatively equal by their very nature. But in terms of the amounts of cooldowns, in terms of their mobility, and even I'd say slightly in terms of their damage output ability, they don't necessarily have to be the exact same. There should be, of course, be a reasonable margin, but it doesn't have to be even to a very tight degree.
Does anyone else have something to say? Because I have a bunch of stuff to say about it. I want to let people speak.
Sunnier?
Well, I mean, obviously, flavor of the month is a bad thing, but I don't think homogenization it is a solution to that. I don't think it's the solution anyone is arguing for. Brewmasters were ridiculously OP in Tier 17, largely because mechanics allowed for them to ignore a lot of stuff. And that's not necessarily a homogenization issue as a numbers issue, or maybe these attacks shouldn't be affected by stagger. Wild thought.
That's what they did.
So, homogenization won't fix stuff like that. But what really, I guess it's a question of how much balancing needs to happen. Does taking stagger off of blackout kick count as homogenization. I don't really count it as that, but some people might. I don't know.
Okay, Mazer?
I think homogenization is kind of a dirty word. I
Right.
like every class to feel different. I like to be a monk and not a warrior. But I don't like it when one class is just so far below every other one. Last year, I think it was druids that were just so far below everyone else. Brewmasters were way up here. And I like everyone to be closer. But I like every class to feel like they're useful. I know DKs have less mobility than monks, or warriors seem to have more mobility than everyone. I follow warrior co-tank around and he's just jumping everywhere. But it's good to have some kind of difference between them in the way they take damage, the way it feels. Right now, we've had such a big shift in how we felt in Blackrock compared to how we feel in Hellfire, where now I'm just guarding everything. I out heal the healers, and that's great. But it feels different than it did, and I like to feel more like a monk, if that makes sense.
Right. I think the biggest problem with Tier 17 that we had was the fact that almost all of the fights were kind of the same, and they worked towards Stagger. And Stagger was just so overly powerful on it, where it's okay if every tank class has its own niche, but you need to have encounters that have that niche, right? Because if you don't have the encounters that actually force, as I remember back in the day, warriors were like the best at absorbing magic damage and stuff like that, and they had to have encounters that were like that. In Tier 17, that didn't happen. I don't know. I think they did a little bit better in Tier 18. There's more of a variety of fights, but we'll see. All right, Troxism, we'll go to you. I know you have some words on this.
I mean, I'm gonna approach this more from a game designer point of view. Like, the whole intentionally unbalancing the game. This is something that's done in MOBA games on purpose by designers. Now, and the argument there is basically that MOBA games tend to have a very stagnant metagame once things work themselves out after a patch, and you kind of need to make balance changes to shake up that metagame. The other thing is with MOBA games, if a hero gets buffed or nerfed, you can play a different one the next game. But people try to apply this logic to World of Warcraft, and it doesn't work. The difference between World of Warcraft and a MOBA is basically that in World of Warcraft, the metagame, so to speak, shifts every tier because there's new content, new bosses that, as said, support different niches. So even if you make absolutely zero balance changes to any class, what classes are the best will change tier by tier, even if you make zero changes at all. Which means that there's already sort of a shifting metagame, that WoW never becomes stagnant just because there's new encounters every tier. In addition, swapping mains in WoW comes at a cost. For example, ring upgrades, artifact upgrades next expansion, attachment to your character. Maybe you've gotten every achievement on your character. You don't want to, you want to have that on your main, etc., etc. There's a lot of reasons not to swap, and it's much more difficult and annoying to do so. Meaning, therefore, forcing people to swap generally isn't a good thing, as it'll make a lot of people unhappy. But further on the point, there's two types of players in this regard. There's a player who likes swapping often because they like playing a different thing. Like, they like switching class. There's those players. I'm sure you all have them in your guilds. And then there's players who like to stick to one specific main, for example, me. And think about the current situation. If you're a player who likes to swap classes, you can already do that, even if they don't intentionally keep making one class OP and another whatever each tier. Because people are going to leave your guild, which means room for people to swap around. Maybe some fight requires class stacking and you can swap to an alt for that, etc., etc. There's already room in the game for that sort of to appeal to those types of players who just like playing different stuff all the time. And if you don't purposely unbalance the game, there's room for people who just want to stick to the same thing because it'll be viable every tier. You're not going to feel like you're gimping your right. Now, let's imagine a world where Blizzard intentionally just says, okay, this tank spec is going to be the best this tier by a lot. Now, that might seem like, oh, well, it's shifting, mixing things up, forcing people to play different stuff. But if you're a person who likes to stick to the same main, you feel pressure to switch. And the higher end you play, the more pressure you will feel. And you'll feel bad about it, both internal and external pressure. Which means that you're not having fun. And your choice basically becomes either you just quit playing, or you switch to playing a class you may not want to play, or you don't want to go through the bother of switching, etc. So if the designers do that, if the designers intentionally create imbalance for the sake of shifting the meta game, what you're really doing is you're just screwing over people who like switching the same main just to appeal even more to people who like switching classes every tier. It's just like, it's a game designer failure. You want to appeal to as many people at the same time as possible. Obviously, you cannot please everyone, but it's another case of like what I said before about balancing tanking, about the average player, and then allowing more skilled tanks to make DPS trade-offs. You're trying to keep everybody happy rather than just one specific group. That is the job of the game designer. Everybody happy.
Why can't the game designers make like each tier have specific, like 2 or 3 encounters that kind of focus in on particular tank mechanics that one class is going to be better than the other? So
Go ahead. Because on Mythic, there's usually only 2 or 3 encounters that even matter on a given tier, or sometimes only 1. This tier for a tank, there's 3 encounters that matter. Zul'Harak, Tyrant, and Archimon. Every other encounter is pretty much irrelevant as a tank, because it's just not hard at all. Like, you'll never really, like... I mean, that list might change for other classes, but the point still stands. There's usually 2 or 3 bosses per tier. Last tier was Blackhand and Blast Furnace. Those were the only challenges. So whatever tank has the niche on those 2 or 3 fights is going to be the best tank. That's already in the game. There's no point adding further imbalance to make that even worse on purpose.
Okay.
It's already like that. Like, DK suck on Tyrant. Well, Tyrant's one of the harder bosses, so that kind of makes DK suck just by default, even though it's not like a bad class.
Our condolences.
Otherwise.
Right. Well, they talked last expansion a lot about wanting to move away from the swap at so many stacks type mechanics and make tanking a lot more interactive and fun. So my question to you guys, did they succeed? And if not, what can they do to make tanking more engaging?
I mean, if nobody else wants, well, I mean, I guess that I can begin. I would say they absolutely did not succeed at all. I think that they actually managed to fail quite miserably there. First of all, let's talk about the swap mechanics. Mists of Pandaria actually saw a lot of tanks, act as a soul tank for multiple encounters. This was for 2 reasons. The first reason was, of course, because of vengeance gaming, because your single tank could do a hell of a lot more damage than 2 tanks. I think a good example might be Heroic 25 Protectors of the Endless. Lei Shen, I think, was also whole time in some cases.
Fuck. Garrosh.
Yeah, there you go.
Kind of. Paragon's even solo tank, but you 1.5 tanked with the Scorpion. You just tank everything with the Scorpion. You literally do 10 million burst DPS. Not even joking.
Yeah. And then, if I recall correctly, this is going towards the very end of the Wall of the Genre beta, there was a post about potentially introducing Saber Lash mechanics again, or making things quote-unquote require 2 tanks. What that's actually translated to is mechanics that essentially have no gameplay but still force you to have 2 tanks. Look at Iron River, for example. Yeah,
Gorfiend is a way better example of that.
But I mean, basically mechanics that in which you do nothing, but if you don't have a second tank, then you're really screwed.
Wipe.
Yeah, and that to me is an example of horrible design. Then let's go back to the larger question about making tank gameplay more engaging. When we say more engaging, then I mean now
playing the game.
The predominant, the archetype of the tank is a player that obviously draws the attention of his or her foes and then survives the incredible amounts of damage that they deal. The fact right now is that tank survivability is much more in healer control than it was in Mists of Pandaria. So our metagame has largely been reduced to calling out externals. And I mean, all right, you can argue that the average player does still find some degree of challenge in pulling off their active mitigation rotation, but I don't think that that's the case for a lot of Mythic end players. And in that case, I would regard both of Blizzard's goal of making tank gameplay A, more interesting, and B, also making it require more players to have failed.
Okay.
I think, like, I don't know. I'm on the complete opposite side of the spectrum where I would much rather have boring or mediocre tank gameplay if I'm tanking than sitting on the bench. So if it means that we swap at 3 debuffs, then as long as I'm tanking, that is so much better than me being a Windwalker. Like, I cannot
what is
express
up with
how
And
much...
that's totally fair. No,
Well,
I mean,
any
and I completely
DPS.
agree.
I
To
completely
be
agree.
fair,
Yeah, but solo tanking is a totally different discussion, though. That doesn't really have to do with the specific mechanics in HFC.
Right.
yeah,
Like
and to be
you
clear,
can
that's
you
not what
can
I'm
disable solo tanking while still having engaging gameplay for both tanks.
True.
Sorry, what I was just saying was, to be clear, I'm not arguing that we go back to a model where we have, one tank fights necessarily. But I am saying, though, is that the goal of making both tanks feel engaged is what I see as being a problem. For example, I think that if you had more, if you had something like Saberlash mechanics that were actually very dangerous, where both tanks needed to raise to fight for their survival, that to me would be a lot more interesting than what we have right now, where you actually have dead time, where your second tank does nothing.
I think this very much depends on skill. So at your guys' skill level, yes, you're totally bored by Saberlash mechanics. At my skill level, which is just partway through Mythic, we're still challenged by that. And I think like the difference between those needs to be taken into account of. Like even at my skill level, I'm still way above an average player. So if we're arguing that mechanics just have to be harder, that's a different thing than the mechanics have to be more interesting.
I would say that it's more going back to the damage, to the survival for damage argument, which is that, like you said, there is a variety of of levels of skill to cater to, and that is absolutely a valid point. That's totally a fair point. So if that's what it's going to be, then I think that what we need to replace it with is potentially making damage more interesting.
Yeah. Mazer, what do you think?
I think having more engaging mechanics is important. I think it's more fun than just taunt here. But sometimes the mechanics where it's just taunt here can still be engaging. Zul'Harrak is a good example. I think the taunt every 8 seconds during that last 35% is pretty engaging. It requires a lot of communication between the two tanks, especially when you're still learning it. Shout of Fear was another one where if you didn't have the taunt swap at the exact precise moment, was it Shout of Fear or Shout of Pride? It was Shout of Pride. It became interesting just because it had...
In the last phase on Heroic at least, because he would do Naked and Afraid and then Melee right after, which would be a one-shot.
Yeah, I'm thinking,
Yeah.
he's talking to
Yeah,
Shout
I was
of
thinking
Pride,
of Shout
though,
of Pride,
right?
though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And
Pride,
I
it
think
doesn't matter if you get hit with the debuff, you're not going to kill
it
each
mattered to
other.
us.
Yeah, and,
Yeah,
and our team, definitely mattered. If that's where we got all of our sound clips, like "Taunt, you furry bastard." Yeah.
So I think that's engaging. I think having to taunt at a specific time, and if you miss it by a couple seconds, you wipe. I think that's kind of interesting. But I think the most interesting stuff is where you have to do a little dance, or you do something correct, and maybe you don't die if you fail, but you get a huge damage buff if you do it right. I think that's kind of a fun bit of gameplay, and I think that's one that can appeal to people of all skill levels.
Yep.
I'll address this by just looking at the fights in Hellfire Citadel. One by one, quickly. Hellfire Assault. This fight is fucking retarded. I have nothing else to say about it. Iron Reaver. I mean, what is the tank mechanic on Iron Reaver? Basically, if you're actually taking the fight seriously and you're not just fucking, I don't know, like, trying to ride the line, so to speak, then what you do is you run out early and really far, and you just stand there because you ran out very early. Like, if you try to toe the line by running in and out just far enough, you're just risking a wipe, especially like on progression. That's just stupid. So the gameplay of that mechanic is basically stop playing your character half the time. It's even worse if because it's a threat-based mechanic, not a target-based mechanic. If you do a lot of damage as a tank, you get every single artillery. in a row.
And I think that's a great bit of
stand out
gameplay
the whole time.
because I like to make sure I'm at the point where my co-tank will take all of them, and I can just stand there.
Yeah, but that's not gameplay either. Either way.
I don't know.
My
I
point
have
is
fun
like
with it.
the whole run around and stand there mechanic. You're not playing your character when you're standing there. That's not a good mechanic.
Yeah, it's
That's
just
not
like
even playing-
Cormrock.
And then moving on to the Chrome Rock. A 10-second stun. What the fuck do you even do? You just stand. You may as well just take your hands off the goddamn keyboard. That's
It's a good
That's
chance
often
to
what
have
people
it
do, actually.
like it's a pointless mechanic. It's a DPS mechanic. DPS have to avoid you. I mean, okay, you position it a little bit, blah blah blah, but like it's not even really a tank mechanic. It's a tank go AFK mechanic. Then we move on to Kilrog, and it's like, okay, there's an AM mechanic. AM mechanics are always very class-based. Some classes have an easier time with them, some have a harder
Brewmasters,
time.
like Elusive
Rod 10.
Brew. Come on, seriously, give us guard.
I mean,
That's it.
I'm not gonna go into that whole thing because you could fucking debate that shit for an hour, but my point is I don't very like AM mechanics. And like, and I mean, DK doesn't have too many problems with them, so it's not like I'm super biased. Gorfiend, like I said before, it has no tank mechanics. The only thing it has is a forced, you need a second tank or you instantly wipe mechanic. The only tank mechanic on Gorfiend is interrupt the ad, and DPS can do that for you if you suck. So it's just like, that's not even, there aren't very any tank mechanics. Swap the ad at a bunch of stacks, sure. But I'll be honest, like, even on progression, that ad wasn't very threatening, and you could just external through it.
At least for us on Gorfiend, we're running around soaking up the little orbs that are popping out. That's 30 seconds of entertainment where I'm running around.
Yeah, but you can just stand in melee range with your back to it, have one tank on either side, and then have a middle soaker. Like, you have a tank on the left, a tank on the right, they just stay in melee, they just catch them with their back while they're DPS in the boss. That's not very much gameplay. And then have one guy in the middle, like a hunter or something, do the same thing. Like, it's not very much gameplay. Then you move on to Iskar. I mean, I don't even know, like, there's nothing for a tank to do on Iskar. Chakram is like it's just like a dumbed down version of artillery, and then there's no damage on that fight. You can't even die. It's literally impossible, and you just play DPS. In fact, a lot of these fights, you just play as a shitty DPS if you're a tank.
I don't know. I mean, clearly you do something different than I do on Iskar, but I have the orb quite a bit. I'm interrupting the warden.
Yeah, but orb
tanking
tossing is
Raven.
something DPS do.
I mean,
Like, yeah, you do orb tossing, but it's very simple.
I think that we need to make a distinction over here. I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt. We need to make a distinction. We are talking here about mechanics that's solely applied to tanks, and I mean, absolutely, I can see why the orb, specifically on Iskar or say jobs on interrupts would be compelling for a lot of you. I mean, heck, they'd even be compelling for me if I were assigned to them. But the issue here is that they aren't tank exclusive. So there's no guarantee that you as a tank will be assigned to those
Right.
jobs.
Okay.
It feels like kind of an arbitrary line, though. Like, so many mechanics are because of a difficult combination of a thing that affects the raid and a thing that affects the tank. And where do you draw that line? It's like, well, we only count stuff that only applies to tanks,
I mean,
which kind of brings up this bigger issue of the tanks are playing a completely different encounter than the rest of the raid. They're just off doing their own thing, and no one cares about what the other group is doing. And I don't think that is an ideal state either.
I mean, okay, I'll take it back a little. Iskar is okay, but I do think tank survival could be a bigger deal there.
Right.
But either way, like, moving on to Sok, because you cannot die on Iskar, it's impossible. Sakrafar, I mean, you use some cooldowns in P1, then either in Phase 2, you either sit in a construct auto-attacking and then using an ability every 5 seconds, or you just tank some weak ads and do absolutely nothing. I guess you can help interrupt, but that's just like, I mean, if we're getting down to interrupts being like the only tank
Right.
mechanic,
Yeah,
that's
interrupt
a
is not a
problem.
very engaging mechanic. That's for sure.
I
do hate
mean,
interrupts.
Fell Lord, you spend 20 seconds doing absolutely nothing but dodging shit every time you get soul cleaved, and then like you have one phase where you actually can die, but it's so short you can just spam every external fruit and you will take 0 damage. So there's like nothing on that fight. I guess you can soak cavitations if you feel like being helpful. And you can play shitty DPS, like I said, which is always your only real option. Zoharak, on Mythic, it's a great fight for the first 2 minutes. Then once the ads die, there's absolutely nothing to do. And I guess you can soak black holes, which we have tanks do, because why not? But, because it's a joke. Yeah. Tyrant, I mean, it's a very binary fight as a Death Knight. It's either you have a CD up or you get one-shotted by every single auto attack. And it has a very lazy tank swap mechanic that people hate. I mean, it's like either you have a cooldown as a DK, you just die. That's it. There's no other, like, there's no real
That's where
thinking
Brewmasters
about
shine.
it.
Hello, Shuffle.
Because DKs have no active mitigation on Tyrant. But either way, I'm not going to fucking talk about DKs on Tyrant. Moving on to Manaroth. I mean, why does the knockback even exist before phase 3 on the combo? Like, what purpose does it serve? It's not like, I mean, if you're saying, oh, so that it's harder to solo tank it, well, that the debuff should be doing that, not the fucking knockback. Before in phase 3, I can kind of understand why it has the knockback, because at least you have to dodge the crescent. You know, if you can't just charge to him, on all Mythic he stuns you, so you can't do that either. But the point is, like, before phase 3, that knockback is just there to annoy tanks. That's all the purpose it serves. And in Mythic, when you tank the ad, it's exactly the same mechanic as fucking Iron Reaver and Chrome Rock. You run out, you stand there, you do nothing till it explodes. You don't even use a cooldown because you won't actually die to like 16 Doom Spikes from full HP, even with no cooldowns. So it's like you're literally just standing there doing nothing. And it's like, and then you get to Archimon, which is like, phase 1 and 2 are okay, but it's just a tank swap mechanic. The reason phase 1 and 2 are okay is because tanks soak Doomfire on Mythic, so they actually have to do something. Although even that is just standing out there, dropping your goddamn Doomfire. You see a fucking pattern in all these fights? You stand out there and do nothing,
Yeah,
like
do
4
nothing,
different
yeah.
fights. And then in phase 3 Archimon, we have the worst tank mechanic of the entire tier on Mythic.
Die.
It is the fucking source. The source of fucking chaos. If you actually do the mechanic correctly and you don't cheese it, then it becomes a DPS mechanic. As a tank, all you do is just run at the damn thing. Maybe you use your roll if you have it, because you're not a DK. But the point is you just walk at the damn thing and hope the DPS kill it in time. It's a DPS mechanic, not a tank mechanic. Like, why do people suicide tanks on source? Because they don't want to waste DPS.
Right.
Because it's actually a DPS mechanic. It is not a tank mechanic. Tanks don't really do anything with Source. The only reason Source even exists is so you need a second tank in P3. That's it.
All right, well,
Like,
Troxism, I'm going to
it's just a
challenge you
waste
here,
DPS
sir.
time.
What is your favorite mechanic or tanking encounter in Warlords so far? Did they actually get one right?
Do you enjoy tanking at all?
Yeah, maybe you should be playing a healer, sir.
Not in this tier. This tier they made tanking
Not this
really
tier,
horrible.
but like this expansion.
Good encounters this expansion. Imperator Margok was decent, but that was mostly because you actually
You still
played
had
as
to
a
run
DPS
away
on that
and stand
encounter.
there doing nothing, so that's the same thing.
Yeah, but you had gameplay around it because you needed to have someone with a Transcendence or Leap do that mechanic on Mythic.
Mhm.
That meant there was actually gameplay around it. You had to time it perfectly, or you would fuck it up and wipe. Or not wipe, but you'd cause problems for your raid. There was actual gameplay there. That's not the same thing as just walking out there lazily and just standing there.
Right.
Because you have tons of extra time. Here it's like, okay, you have to leap within the half second, or you fucking wipe. Or not wipe, again, you know, make it a pain in the ass for your raid.
Right.
Like, and it's actual gameplay there. And and honestly, I don't think Margok was amazing either. I'm just trying to think of fights.
Okay.
And like,
I'll
Last
turn this
Furnace
question.
was okay, but
Yeah.
P2 was fucking horrible.
All right, I'll turn this question to everybody else. What's your favorite tanking encounter in Warlords? Sunnier?
I guess I liked Imperator. I don't know.
Okay.
Oh, I liked I can never remember boss names, so this is kind of my thing. The big rock guy who just stood there in Summit Hands. Formrock, yeah. I really
no.
enjoyed that fight.
Chromog, not
Chroma.
Cormog.
They had
Yes,
too
right.
many of those
Yeah,
F and
Chromog,
K
no,
names. Stop it.
Chromog is, yeah, Chromog actually is a good fight. You know why? Because if you're shit tank, you die on that fight. That's why I like
Oh
it.
man,
It's a fight that
people
really
would
tests
just
your ability to
our
actually
tanks would
see.
just die for no apparent reason. We were so confused what the heck was going on. That was a really
But
interesting.
yeah, that's actually a
angle.
fight I like. I like that fight.
Okay. Mazer,
Because it showed you suck.
What is your favorite encounter so far in WoD?
I liked Blackhand, actually. Probably because I spent so much time on Blackhand that it became... that it kind of grew on me. But I liked
Got a
being
little
able to
Stockholm
transcend...
syndrome going on there.
Yeah, Stockholm Syndrome. But I liked being able to game with Transcendence, using Nimble Brew and then transcending back after I got slammed.
Mm-hmm.
I liked being able to kind of guide Blackhand around the room to make sure that DPS was able to get the most uptime. That had a lot of stuff that I was doing throughout the entire fight. The taunt swapping was just happened very organically. It wasn't like a number of stacks. It was your buddy got knocked away. You better pick him up.
Right.
And there was a little bit of a threat drop in there too, which was always fun if I wanted to kill air, which is always a lot of fun
Yeah,
for me.
that's always the goal of the raid, isn't it?
And
Yeah,
you mythic black hand, and one guy just tanks the boss the whole time. The other guy spends the whole time staring in the inside of a siege engine model getting punted against the wall. Yeah, amazing.
Well, luckily I never did it on Mythic. I just spent a lot of time on Heroic, but I had a lot of fun with it.
All right. And
Actually, I have to talk about Manaroff some more because I fucking hate that fight. As the second to last fight, he does 0 damage. He can't fucking kill a tank. You literally can't die as a tank on that fight. It's the second to fucking last fight, and it's a joke. And I do every possible job. I soak rafts. I coordinate all the interrupts on the damn ad. I do the ad. I fucking tank the glaive combos in phase 3 when the other tanks fucking die. Like, I just do everything I can. And it's still the most boring fight ever, and I fucking hate it because I can't screw it up.
Right.
Is basically what it comes down to. Like, if you're not fucking stupid, you'll never screw it up. And that's with me trying to do every possible job
Hey, Magdalena,
that I can.
what's your favorite encounter so far in WoD?
Well, I suppose that this is sort of betraying my roots a bit because one of my favorite activities as a Blood DK is also to solo stuff. Stuff that's very challenging to solo. Because of that, I tend to pay a lot of attention to damage and DPS, and also things that let me maximize my DPS. So from that point of view, I would probably say Iron Maidens, and that's mostly just because when I played with Chains of Syndragosa there, it was just a really fun fight to focus on from a DPS perspective. There was always stuff to AMS soak. There was always, just various ways to abuse things like RP gain. And I mean, of course, you can argue that it wasn't very compelling from a tank point of view, but from the from the perspective of somebody looking to just maximize damage and pretty much just whore meters, it was a lot of fun. And I'm completely unashamed to say that I would say that the majority of quote-unquote tank gameplay that I've enjoyed this expansion has been more DPS centric, which I know is kind of a problem by itself. But well, there you go.
That is totally you. You're just totally soloing everything, so I completely understand it. I still can't believe you can solo Kazakh. That is ridiculous.
That was actually, Kazakh was not a difficult solo at all.
Still.
It's a little it's actually a little funny because Ordos is still unsolvable, whereas Kazakh was solvable on the first day. I just think that's really funny.
Right. All right. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and move on here. So it's now time to travel to the Peak of Serenity, the home for all monks in
Zen pilgrimage.
Monks, assemble!
I did want to bring up a topic on chiburst.com. This was an explosion of Chi Explosion. So Windwalkers wanted to talk about a haste build using Chi Explosion. I think this all got kind of screwed up when they announced 6.2.2 and the buffs, because that really bumped up multi-strike in there. But it's an interesting read to see the haste build using Chi Explosion for all fights, including single target. And the reason that this works, I've talked to Hina Lover and Callie a lot about this, and the reason this kind of works is the fact that Serenity has such an easy way to screw it up. You miss time your buffs, you're going to drop in DPS substantially. If you don't get very good RNG from your Chi Brews, you're going to drop DPS substantially. But with Chi Explosion, it's a much more, it raises the skill cap up a little bit, so you don't have to be as skilled to get good numbers off of it. So that's the reason why it's kind of good. So it's something to look into. I think it's not quite as good now with the buffs coming in 6.2.2, but until that comes out until September, feel free to give Chi Explosion a run and go pure on haste and go have fun. All right. If you guys play Windwalker, have any thoughts on that?
Nope.
Nope. Okay. All right. So I did want to bring up, we are going to be doing an all-monk raid coming up Saturday, August 29th. We're doing that from 1 to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Pacific Time. We're going to be running both the Horde and Alliance sides at the same time, and you can find those on openraid.us. I'll include a link in the show notes as well. Mizume is going to be running the Horde side. And we're going to be doing a little race here. We're doing Hellfire Normal. Going to try to beat out the DKs this time in World First all single class, because they beat us in Hellfire. So we beat them in Heimall though, so I'll take that. So let's get in there, have a lot of fun. It's going to be a good time. All right, guys. Well, I think it's time to put the brew away. Please rate us on iTunes, Stitcher, subscribe on YouTube, or on Twitch.tv. Roy432 left a 5-star review saying, "Great show, guys. Well-rounded and informative. Thanks for doing it." And thank you in the dojo. We always love it. So please rate us there. It really helps out. And if you would like to help support the show and help it grow and get even better, you can become our boss by going to patreon.com/monkmeditation, like Mazer. You can help guide the future of the show and help get some fun rewards along the way. All right. So I want to give a shout out to all of you guys, you wonderful brewmasters, and DKs pretending to be brewmasters. Thank you so much for joining us. It was a fun show. This is a shout out to the Monk community. You guys are fantastic. It's looking like I'm not going to make it out to BlizzCon this year, which is unfortunate. But I will be watching the streams and looking for you guys, so have fun out there. Sunnier, you got any shout-outs? Your mic is muted.
Sorry, I have noisy dogs that I have to work around. Shout out to my guild for always being accommodating and contributing so well as they always do to the community and everything like that. My dog just pulled the trash bag out.
Oh dear.
All right. And Magdalena, any shout-outs?
Of course, there is a shout out to the Actors community for Death Knights. Always a fantastic community to lead. Also, a shout out to the new Demon Hunter community, which is the Black Temple, which I'm looking forward to, being a heavy part of. And of course, a shout out to the Monk community in Peak of Serenity, who have, for some misguided reason, decided to adopt me as one of their own. I don't know what you guys are thinking, but okay.
All right. And Mazer.
I'd like to shout out to my raid team, working as intended. Thanks for being a great team that I love being a part of. Specifically, Air, Karn, Spencer. I like running the team with you guys. Thank you for backing me up.
All right. Troxism.
I guess I'd like to give a shout out to, yes, I know, funny, but Magdalena, because he basically invited me to this show and gave me a platform to rant and rave about all kinds of shit.
Aww.
And trust me, there's way more where that came from.
So where can they find more of that wonderful salt?
Honestly, not that many places. I have a few articles I wrote. I sometimes post on forums, but I'll be honest, most of it I just say randomly inaccurate or in private one-on-one chats with people.
Okay,
So
well,
if you
hop
want
on.
more salt, fucking talk to me directly.
So if you want to get more of that salt, go to Arcturus on Cold Front, right?
Yes, on Cold Front, yes.
All right.
And I'm sorry to interrupt. It's Acarus.
Acarus, sorry.
Yes.
There's a friggin' R, isn't there?
What Argus?
Yeah.
All
Don't say
right.
that.
Fair enough. All right. Well, as part of the Monk community, if you have a blog, website, or person you want to see in the show, reach out to us via email at show@monkmeditation.com. The Monk community is the best one in the world of Warcraft, and we want to showcase it. You can follow the show at monk_meditation. You can follow me, Chai T, at WowMonk, Air at Airwalker, Monkyo at Monkyo, LeBlue at Kagarai_LeBlue. Our guests can also be found on Twitter, Sunnier at Sunnier Brew, and also on the Tankcast podcast. Is that right?
Yep, which you can find on the Inconspicuous Bear website and also my own website.
And sunniersartofwar.com. All right, Magdalena, you can find at Magdalena DK. Mazer, you can follow at underscore Mazer underscore. Couldn't get Mazer, huh? Nope. All right. Troxism at Troxism. And thank you all for listening. You can watch us live Monday, September 7th, 2015 at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, midnight UTC at twitch.tv/wildmonk. You can also visit monkmeditation.com for links to all the ways to watch and listen to the show. That will wrap up this episode of Monk Meditation.
May your brews be strong and your heart stronger.
Good night, everybody.
I rolled a 20.